So RFK, Robert Kennedy Jr., is, if you can believe it, a relative of JFK, who you might remember as a president of the United States and the reason why presidents no longer drive around in open-topped cars. He being RFK in this case, is kind of a lunatic. I didn't talk about him initially when he started making waves as a Democratic presidential candidate, because he seemed like the only thing that he wanted to talk about was like vaccine mandates. That's basically it. And I didn't give it much mind because I didn't think much of it. But as time has gone on, the impression that I've been given is that he's a deliberate plant candidate who is being introduced into the Democratic environment purely as like a disruptive ticket. Basically, like he's a plant in the Dems in order to create discourse and stir chaos and pull people to the right. Now, the problem with that narrative is that I have never seen a Democrat talk about RFK. See, a bunch of people in chat don't even know he's running as a Dem. Like, every single time that I see RFK talking with a person, he's talking with somebody on the right. Every time I see somebody on social media praising RFK, they're on the right. So it doesn't seem like whatever he's doing or saying is having much pull with the audience that he's meant to be disruptive towards, because he's not going to beat Biden, but he doesn't even seem to be pulling voters away from Biden. Here, take a look at this. This is just from the other day. We're going to look at more than just this, but, you know, let's take a look. Let's take a look. Okay? Here's him talking with a beloved and highly esteemed character in the minds and hearts of Democratic voters. Jordan Peterson. He and Peterson have a silly voice contest. If you haven't heard RFK's voice before, get ready. It is something else.
I've seen the climate apocalypse use fear to induce something approximating the same kind of level of tyranny, as far as I'm concerned, that characterized the vaccine lockdown. So help me sort that out.
First of all, let me just say this about climate. I believe that carbon in the atmosphere and methane does increase warming. Look around, you can see it everywhere. Ice caps are melting, etc., the Greenland ice sheet. I spent a lot of time outdoors, and I see over 69 years, I've seen the changes.
This is another reason to not take his presidency like ticket seriously. He had a surgery that did this to his voice. I don't know the details. Some kind of thing, some kind of disability. I don't know. Now, obviously, his voice is disqualifying. You can say it's unfair, and it is technically to be disqualified from political office because of your voice, but this does it. No president will ever be elected when they sound like this, you know? The only time a president could have sounded like this and won an election would have been before radio. Bullshit, there's no way he sounds like this. He sounds like this. He sounds like this in every video. A lot of people are saying cancer. Yeah, no, it's not his fault. His voice isn't his fault. Like, Jordan Peterson's voice is silly because he's silly, you know? It's just a natural property of his silliness that Jordan Peterson would have that voice. RFK, it was a cancer surgery thing, you know, but it does disqualify him from actually winning an office. You can't sound like that and win in office. So that's just another, I think, layer to the insincerity of this campaign. You know what I mean? If that makes any sense. But listen to what he actually says, okay? Because what he says is ridiculous.
And I've seen the mass migration of animals, of southern animals like black vultures, the northern increase in their ranges. I've kept track since I was a kid about when the leaves turns, and it steadily moved up each year. And so I see that all of my senses are telling me that the warming is occurring. My opinion is basically, as I said, it's based on common sense. I agree 100% with you that this crisis is being used as a pretext for clamping down totalitarian controls the same way that the COVID crisis was. And it's the same people, it's intelligence agencies, it's the World Economic Forum, it's the Billionaires Voice Club at Davos, and it's the same kind of cabal of people who will use every crisis to stratify society toward, greater power for the super rich and greater power for the military, greater power for the intelligence apparatus, and less power for everybody else. A war on carbon is not going to solve the problem. If we don't have a habitat left at the end, my approach to energy is using free market.
Right there. So he does this big conspiracy bit where anti-climate change policies are just a way to transfer wealth and power over to these deep state institutions that are trying to control us. And then his response, oh, well, how would I solve it? Free market capitalism. Famously not a system that transfers wealth and power to shadowy billionaires. So basically, his conspiracism is a joke. Politically, he is reactionary and probably libertarian leaning on an economic front. The thing that distinguishes him is he is extremely conspiracy bent. I don't get it. He admits carbon is the issue, but that removing carbon is conspiracy. Yeah, it's a conspiracy theory. It's not necessarily coherent. Basically, his position is, I think climate change is real, but coincidentally, everything being done to address it is part of the deep state effort to take control away from the people, which is why my solution would be let massive mega corporations do it. Definitely not, an element of greater power that, siphon money and influence away from the people. In terms of policy, he's conspiracy first and everything else second. His libertarian bent towards markets is a way of not alienating conservative voters. The goal with his plant in the Democratic primary, I believe, is to take the more conspiracy-minded, kind of independent-leaning Democrats who are maybe not full MAGA crazy, but are like, kind of vulnerable to conspiracy narratives, and draw them in and pull them over. The problem that I've seen is that it's not working, because if you want to appeal to the modern Democrats, like the current Democrat vote, this is like the worst wedge issue to do it on. He has said that if he becomes president, he will prosecute Dr. Fauci. How many Democrats do you think are buying that line? Like, do you really think that's a strong wedge to try to pull Democrats over on? Like, there's this big contingent of Democrat voters who like Biden, but if there was somebody who was worse than Biden on every issue they like him for, but would also prosecute Fauci, that's someone they would go for. And this is the thing that I find really, really, really curious about RFK Jr. Because I didn't take him seriously at first. I still don't, but I looked into him. He has no political experience, obviously. You could probably guess that. He was, interestingly, an environmental lawyer, an adjunct professor of environmental law at Pace University School of Law in 1986, environmental legislation clinic, founded a nonprofit environmental group. So, okay, sure. But he's mostly been defined over the past decade and a half by anti-vaccine stuff. I mean, that's what Wiki even opens with. Who promoted anti-vaccine propaganda and public health-related conspiracy theories, with like 5 citations for both. Auschwitz Memorial says RFK Jr. speech at anti-vaccine rally exploits Holocaust tragedy. Oh, I didn't know I'd be clicking on something, an attack from the Auschwitz Memorial, but, I guess a lot of people don't like RFK Jr. No doubt RFK Jr. is one of those types to say that the vaccine mandates were exactly like the Holocaust, and I'm sure that's what the Auschwitz Memorial is criticizing him for. Let's see. Even in Hitler's Germany, you could hide in the attic like Anne Frank did, Kennedy said. Oh no, so his point is that the Holocaust was actually less authoritarian than the COVID mandates, even though or the vaccine mandates, even though there weren't actually vaccine mandates. I'm pretty sure that if you just hid in your attic and never left, you could also avoid getting the shot here in America, but I got the shot, so, I'm cucked. Who could say? I got the jab. Yeah, not great. He's like this for a lot of things. Here, let's finish the clip.
and that's not top-down control. We can recover what we had, but we just have to stay out of fear because that is the weapon of tyrants. If you like this video and you want to help me become president of the United States, go to Kennedy24.com.
I don't, and I don't. Thank you. Actually, let's take a look at his campaign website. I'm actually curious. I haven't looked there. What do we have here? What are we fronting here? What positions are we most concerned with? Okay. So this is, I haven't clicked past anything. This is actually the first page of the website. This is pretty ugly looking, I think, for a presidential candidate website. Yeah, it's a bit basic, but okay. Priorities: honest government, reconciliation. I think reconciliation in this case means prosecute Fauci. Environment, revitalization, peace, civil liberties. Let's take a look. Honest government. For the people. I love things that are for the people. Government institutions have betrayed our trust. The intel agencies spy on our own people. That's true. Government and tech platforms conspire to surveil and censor the public. Regulatory agencies have been captured by those they are supposed to regulate. Wall Street controls the SEC. Polluters and extractive industries dominate the EPA and BLM. Pharma controls the CDC, NIH, and FDA. Big agriculture controls the USDA. Big tech has captured the FTC. So you might notice that this is broadly true. Regulatory capture is a real thing and a real problem. However, it is interesting that the very first paragraph of this section would be corporations control our government, when his policy on climate change, and in fact a lot of things, is let corporations handle it. As I've said before, he doesn't actually want to stop corporations from doing anything. He wants to instill distrust in the government so that people don't trust the government, but do nothing to meaningfully challenge the power these corporations have. Clean government isn't just about removing corrupt individuals, it's about changing a system in which perfectly decent people become agents of corruption without even knowing it. We're going to remake public institutions to serve the public. We will roll back the secrecy and make government transparent. Protect whistleblowers. Rein in the lobbyists that shuns people from government agencies to lucrative positions in companies they were supposed to regulate and back again. We'll get money out of politics. We'll open our institutions to real citizen involvement. We'll restore integrity to government. That all sounds good. Yes, Bureau of Land Management, guys, not Black Lives Matter. That all sounds good, doesn't it? I like that in a vacuum. But I do think it's interesting, again, especially when contrasted with his libertarian economic politics, the fact that nothing here even references regulation of corporations. See, if you acknowledge that corporate involvement is directly responsible for a huge amount of corruption, it seems kind of odd to then exclusively talk about like draining the swamp on a federal level, but not even touch on like corporate power. Because again, it's all just a meaningless platitude. When people talk about corporate control of government, but don't care about reining in corporations, what they're essentially saying is they want the government to be more transparently inept or ineffectual in reining in corporations. They're essentially saying we want to get rid of the metaphor. We want to get rid of the dog whistle. Rather than having corporations control the government, you know, through lobbying or backdoor deals or whatever, just have corporations have total power anyway, you know? This is a consistent theme with libertarian economics, where they pretend that the problem with corruption is exclusively corporations and government meddling with each other, rather than what it really is, which is just any institution with power acting without accountability. If you want the government to act with accountability but not corporations, it just means you're pro-corporation. It doesn't really mean you're pro-transparency. So that's one. Reconciliation. Oh, okay. It's not about prosecuting Fauci. It's about people of vaguely ethnic skin tones holding hands. Heal the divide. America is more polarized and divided now than any time in living memory. That's true. Both sides are wrong. The basic problem is the division itself. Let's heal the divide. RFK Jr. has clear positions on most of today's divisive trigger issues, like abortion, guns, and immigration. But he knows both sides have legitimate concerns and legitimate moral positions. No one is deplorable. Furthermore, most of the disagreements obscure deeper shared values. Everyone wants their children to be safe. Few relish the thought of dead fetuses, nor do they want to force women to have unwanted babies. Everyone wants safe streets, yet few wish for millions of people to languish in prison. So obviously this is centrist hand-waving. The idea that like there are fully shared underlying values here. No one wants millions to languish in prison, right? RFK will draw on the broad moral agreements beneath their divisions. He will model careful listening and create conditions where each group can hear the stories of the other. He'll lead the way towards national reconciliation, respectful dialogue, and willingness to change, grow, and forgive. In the case of race relations, reconciliation includes repairing the damage caused by centuries of bigotry. Oh. Our administration will take racial healing seriously through a program of targeted community repair. Our operating principle is not guilt for the sins of one's ancestors, but rather compassion. We will invoke the authentic desire in all Americans, white and black, liberal and conservative, to improve the condition of our black and native brothers and sisters. That's pretty good. I think that sounds pretty good, personally. No asterisks from me. These commitments to respect and unity start right now in the campaign. In Kennedy's own words, and then he quotes Kennedy. I think that this paragraph on its own is pretty unimpeachable, actually. Now, it's worth noting that in all of the videos that I've seen RFK Jr. speak and talk with other people, I have never seen him talk about this. In fact, I've never seen him talk about anything other than vaccine conspiracies and, I guess, climate change conspiracies. So, you know, this might be a position on paper, but I never hear him talk about it. I don't know how important it is to his actual advocacy, because I feel like otherwise he would be speaking more of it. Also, he has clear positions on these issues. What are those positions? I'm actually curious. I would like to know. He has clear positions. I would like to see those positions if possible. Oh, that's right. I did see this. RFK Jr. didn't like the Supreme Court decision on affirmative action. Listen to this. Regarding the Supreme Court banning affirmative action in higher education, I know many Americans feel that purely race-based decisions are unfair. However, this feeling misses important context. The effects of racist policies going back centuries are now self-perpetuating. Affirmative action understands this and uses race-based policies to undo the effects of racist policies. Colorblind admissions tend to favor those who are already in the circle of privilege. It favors those who grew up in affluent, educated households. Wouldn't you like to invite in those who have been left out in the cold? That's pretty inarguably progressive. He forgot the grift for a minute. Well, hold on. I don't know if he's a grifter. I might have to reassess. I think that his brain is poisoned. And I think that he is primarily concerned with conspiracism and COVID. But it might well be the case that he's legitimately progressive. He's just a crank. Exactly. His legitimate progressivism might serve to endear him to Democrat voters in a way which makes him a more effective schism. Unfortunately for him or for anyone who would benefit from that scheme, I I generally do not see him talk about this stuff. A lot of conservatives despise this, by the way. There's Dr. Deborah So. Remember her? Yeah, the replies are all just conservatives being mad and feeling betrayed by him. But okay. I would be willing to admit being wrong on my impression of him as a reactionary. Of course, I think his economic positions are reactionary. And a lot of the stuff that he says, if not insincere at the very least, is not really committed to in the way that he cares about the conspiracy bent. But okay, let's keep going. We're learning today, huh? Environment. Damn, Vaush, this guy's kind of wild. That is true. Clean it up. Clean it up. Clean it up. RFK Jr. was instrumental in transforming the Hudson from a dead river into one of America's cleanest today. He did it by uniting liberal environmentalists with conservative rod and gun folks who shared a desire for a clean, healthy environment. As a president, he will bring the same commitment and coalition building to address the most pressing economic problems in America and beyond. Again, remember that his explicit stated policy on how to address climate issues is let the free market handle it. Recent years have seen one environmental disaster after another. Floods and droughts, fires, toxic spills. Our soils are depleted. The weather is wacky. Trees are dying, and water in many places is toxic. Chronic disease is at an all-time high. We're going to address these problems at their root causes. First, we'll shift agricultural subsidies so as to encourage regenerative practices. I think that's an okay thing to do. Today, a new generation of farmers and ranchers is building soil, replenishing groundwater, and detoxifying land, all while producing just as much food as conventional farmers and earning a decent livelihood. Secondly, we'll incentivize the transition of industry to zero waste cycles and clean energy sources, and forge agreements with other countries to implement these policies through the global supply chain. Well, this is kind of weird because here he's talking about policy, not free market. Which position do you think he actually believes? Finally, we'll protect wildlands from further development by curbing mining, logging, oil drilling, and suburban sprawl. We will become a global advocate for rainforest preservation and marine restoration. We'll rethink development. Yeah, so interesting. It seems like in the policy position side of things, he seems to be perfectly in favor of government intervention. RFK Jr. is in fact a grifter. He urged guests to be vaccinated at his party. This is the classic Joe Rogan bit. Can you be a selective grifter on some issues but not others? Yeah. Well, again, let's not focus on the grifter angle. He's an unviable candidate no matter what. I'm interested in the effect he's going to have on the electorate. What does this mean? You know? That's what I want to learn. He's pro-Russia, if I recall correctly. That I would be very surprised if he wasn't. Hold on, because that's like a big conspiracy bent right now. Revitalization. And this is about restoring America from its economic decline. Government assistance to the nation's most vulnerable is a high priority. Reverse the policies that led to this poverty. Rebuild the industrial infrastructure ruined by 40 years of offshoring and misguided free trade schemes. Whoa, what happened to him being in favor of the free market? We'll enact policies that favor small and medium businesses. This still isn't good economic policy, by the way. Break up too big to fail banks. We face today a terrible pandemic, not of COVID, but of chronic disease. Autoimmunity, allergies, diabetes, obesity, addiction, anxiety, and depression afflict 2/3 of the population, up from a few percent in our grandparents' time. A Kennedy administration will go beyond making the existing modalities available to all to include low-cost, alternative, and holistic therapies that have been marginalized in a pharma-dominated system. Here it is. Okay, even in the policy stuff, the COVID conspiracy crank stuff, it can't be fully contained. So one of the big things that he believes the whole vaccines cause all sorts of diseases stuff, but he's a big believer in the idea that the pharmaceutical industry is making a ton of money off of it's literally the meme where it's they give us pills that are supposed to make us healthy, but they make us sick while denying us the real cure, that kind of thing, you know? No, yeah, he thinks that vaccines cause autism and a whole other host of issues. So his suspicion of pharmaceutical companies is probably heavily associated with his belief that we could benefit from, quote, alternative and holistic therapies, which probably means insane crank shit. I don't know if it means crystals and prayer healing, but who knows? Maybe it does. So I guess that's an option. We're working on it, Crash Anarchy. I believe it was the Bill Maher interview. He said he thinks vaccines are making people trans. Yes, that's a big one for the anti-vaccine cranks, because there's a big association between autism and being trans. So they're like, oh, well, if vaccines make you autistic, they would make you trans too. Peace. We're getting lots of video clips to look at.
What happened?
You are the big
Lex Fridman, just 7 days ago.
Picture of this is you're an outspoken critic of pharmaceutical companies, Big Pharma. What is the biggest problem with Big Pharma, and how can it be fixed?
Well, the problem could be fixed through regulation, the problems, but the pharmaceutical industry is I don't want to say, because this is going to seem extreme, that a criminal enterprise, But if you look at the history, that is an applicable description or characterization. For example, the four biggest vaccine makers.
I think the pharma industry is criminal, but I don't think it's because of any sneaky vaccine stuff or whatever. I think it's just because the system that's set up, discourages investment in places where it needs to go, and incentivizes overcharging, just massive profit seeking on something that should not be done for profit. I think it should be nationalized, or at least folded into that economic model.
Sanofi, Merck, Pfizer, and Glaxo, four companies that make all of the 72 vaccines that are now mandated for effectively mandated for American children. Collectively, those companies have paid $35 billion.
I believe he also blames vaccines for his voice. If I recall correctly, he said that the problem with his throat was caused by vaccines that he's taken.
In criminal penalties and damages in the last decade. And I think since 2000, about 79 billion. So these are the most corrupt companies in the world. And the problem is that they're serial felons. So
this is true. They are serial felons, and the people who run pharma companies are absolutely evil. However, the vaccines that we take when we're growing up, the ones that you get when you're like 2 or 3 or whatever, save millions of lives and are proven to be good and safe. We settled this a long time ago. So you can simultaneously believe that an industry is corrupt and run by terrible people, while also understanding the service they provide is a necessary one. You can nationalize that service. You can nationalize pharma work. You can do something. There's lots of stuff you can do to fix the problems with the pharma companies, okay? Lots of stuff. But we still need the vaccines. I mean, I guess we don't need them. We could just accept millions more dying every year for no reason if we wanted to. That's an option if we really want to.
They do this again and again and again. So they did Vioxx, Merck did Vioxx, which Vioxx, they killed people by falsifying science. And they did it. They lied to the public. They said this is a headache medicine and an arthritis painkiller, but they didn't tell people that it also gave you heart attacks. And they knew. We've found when we sued them.
I'm not familiar with the exact case that he's referring to here. It is absolutely the case that pharmaceutical industries have exercised irresponsible standards in the past when it comes to their checking. The exact process for getting a drug approved on market with like the FDA and everything, that happens for sure. But again, none of this impugns the viability of the vaccines. This would be like pointing out that because some food companies sold like tainted lettuce or whatever, that would mean like now you have to suspect like all food produced by all farms, right? There's tons of corruption in the U.S. agricultural industry, to be fair, absolutely. And every once in a while, epidemics or outbreaks of disease make their way through food due to lax standards. That doesn't change the fact that we need food. You can change the system that produces the food if you want, but the food is necessary.
The memos from their bean counters saying we're going to kill this many people, but we're still going to make money. So they make those calculations, and those calculations are made very, very regularly. And then,
Yes, those calculations are made with all products made by any company that have any potential of hurting people. They're made with they're made with any kind of vehicle, frankly. Any kind of medicine, any kind of vehicle. This is why, like, even relatively innocuous medicine, like, say, Tylenol, can actually be dangerous to some people if their bodies are weak enough where they have certain conditions. There's always a risk factor. The question is, what's an acceptable risk factor? If you produce a medicine that will heal on average every 1 million people for the one that it hurts or kills, that's potentially a acceptable decision to make. Because otherwise, you have to make the argument you could never make anything because everything could potentially hurt someone, Like, oh, you can't make this toy. Like 1 in every 1 billion children might choke on it. Like, obviously, we accept reasonable standards of risk.
When they get caught, they pay a penalty, and I think they paid about $7 billion.
That's a big penalty.
For Vioxx, but then they went right back that same year that they paid that penalty. They went back into the same thing again with Gardasil and with a whole lot of other drug. So the way that the system is set up, the way that it's sold to doctors, the way that nobody ever goes to jail. So there's really no penalty, that it all becomes part of the cost of doing business.
Yes, this is an issue with capitalism. What does this have to do with vaccines? You'll notice that he's avoiding that, by the way. He's talking about the danger of this like one specific like headache medication, but he's not talking about, because he mentioned the vaccines at first. He said, oh, these vaccines that people are basically forced to get when they're young. But then he's talking about these other, well, what's an example of a vaccine people are forced to take these days where it's been proven that it's actually super dangerous, but we take it anyway? There isn't any.
And, you know, you can see other businesses that if there's no penalty, if there's no real...
He talks specifically about vaccines at 155.38. Sure, because we're not even done looking at his website. Got a lot to look at.
Us, the taxpayer, to find problems with those drugs before they get to market. But if you know that drug is going to pay for your mortgage, you may overlook a little problem, or even a very big one. And that's the problem.
That is a thing that happens in capitalism, yes. The profit motive often incentivizes people to cut corners when it comes to basic regulations and safety concerning the products they want to ship. Yes, that is a consistent issue. I agree that medicine should not be for profit. I am completely fine with the Medicare for all and the removal of insurance agencies and the pharmaceutical industry being nationalized. I'm totally okay with all that stuff. And that would fix these problems. At least it would solve a lot of them. It'd still be a lot of work to do. But
talked about that the media slanders you by calling you an anti-vaxxer. And you've said that you're not anti-vaccine, you're pro-safe vaccine.
Oh, interestingly, he seems to be in favor of marijuana decriminalization, which would actually make him left of Biden on this issue. I'm not surprised that he is. That fits with a libertarian tendency.
Difficult question. Can you name any vaccines that you think are good?
I think some of the live virus vaccines are probably averting more problems than they're causing. There's no vaccine that is, safe and effective.
Those are big words. What about the polio? Words. Can we talk about the?
Well, here's the problem.
Yes.
Here's the problem. The polio vaccine contained a virus called simian virus 40, SV40. It's one of the most carcinogenic materials that is known to man. In fact, it's used now by scientists around the world to induce tumors in rats and guinea pigs in labs. But it was in that vaccine. 98 million people who got that vaccine in my generation got it. And now you've had this explosion of soft tissue cancers in our generation that kill many, 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 many more people than polio ever did. So,
no. There's actually an AP News article on this exact lie. CDC did not say the polio vaccine gave millions of Americans a, quote, cancer virus. Claim. The CDC admitted that 98 million Americans, that's the exact number he just gave, was given a cancer virus through the polio vaccine. False. The CDC has made no such statement, and the claim misrepresents a fact sheet put out by the agency more than 10 years ago about how some polio vaccines administered during an 8-year period in the 50s through the 60s, they've said that 10 to 30% of the 98 million shots administered in that period were contaminated with SV40, but most studies have found no causal relationship between SV40 and cancer in humans. So basically, they were trying new ways of making the vaccine, and then for a time, more than half a century ago, there was an unwanted contaminant in it, which studies have not even found like a causative level of cancer production. And he has turned that into more people died of cancer in that one thing than ever died of polio, which is insane. That is an insane and objectively incorrect thing to say. He is fully anti-vax. To say that no vaccines are safe and effective. Also, would he now say like, oh, well, now that they no longer have SV40, now polio vaccines are safe and effective? Probably not. But because he's like a crank on this. He's a full crank on this.
So if you say to me, did the polio vaccine was effective against polio, I'm going to say yes. And if you say to me, did it kill more people, did it cause more deaths than avert, I would say, I don't know, because we don't have the data on that. So,
we do actually.
But let's talk. Well, we kind of have to narrow in on: is it effective against the thing it's supposed to fight?
Oh well, a lot of them are. Let me give you an example. The most popular vaccine in the world is the DTP vaccine, diphtheria, tetanus, and pertussis. It was introduced in this country around 1980. That vaccine caused so many injuries that Wyeth, which was the manufacturer, was said to the Reagan administration, we are now paying $20 in downstream liabilities for every dollar that we're making in profits, and we are getting out of the business unless you give us permanent immunity from liability. So the vaccine companies then were given, and by the way, Reagan said at that time, why don't you just make the vaccine safe? And Wyeth said, because vaccines are inherently unsafe. They said unavoidably unsafe. You cannot make them safe. And so when Reagan wrote the bill and passed it, the bill says in its preambles, because vaccines are unavoidably unsafe. And the Brucewitz case, which was a Supreme Court case that upheld that bill, uses that same language. Vaccines cannot be made safe. They're unavoidably unsafe. So this is what the law says. Now, I just want to finish this.
So, sorry, I was reading up on everything that he was saying, and thankfully he talks slowly, so I'm able to keep pace with him. So what he's referring to here is a series of lawsuits in the mid-1980s which referred to vaccine safety, which led to some manufacturers withdrawing their DTP vaccines, which paved the way to the U.S. National Childhood Vaccine Injury Act in 1986. The act provided funds to compensate for adverse events following immunization. It's worth noting that with vaccines and also literally all medicine ever in all of human history, there is always a potential for adverse side effects. That is unavoidable. It is simply not possible. Even for things as simple as like sutures or Tylenol or like Flintstone's chewable gummy, it is always possible for there to be side effects. Now, the current DTP, the DTAP vaccination, is capable of having side effects, as is the case with many medical injunctions which affect millions and millions and millions of people. You will see people who have more severe possible side effects. This one right here says that it could potentially lead to death. I could find the exact same thing if I went over here and looked at the back of any of the medicine that I have on the left side of my desk. The question is, what causes more harm? The potential side effects to the DTAP, Tdap, TD, or HIP vaccines, or having the diseases that they prevent you from getting? So we can take a look really quick. So, diphtheria, tetanus, and pertussis. Let's take a look. Pertussis, that's whooping cough, causes 160,000 children under 5 to die every year. 24.1 million cases of whooping cough. 160,700 children die yearly from that condition. Now that's globally. So if you wanted to scale that down to the United States, you can. I'm not here to do a math stream. I'm a humanities major. Tetanus deaths. 213 to 293,000 deaths worldwide each year, responsible for 5 to 7% of all neonatal deaths and 5% of all maternal deaths globally. It's a lot of people. And then finally, diphtheria. Oh, that's nice. Diphtheria only killed 4,000 or so people in 2019. It should be noted that all of these deaths are in countries which do not have the vaccines for these diseases. We're taking a look at what these death numbers are from countries that don't have the ability to immunize their children. In fact, here, tetanus deaths by country. we get that? Now, the number of tetanus deaths has gone down quite a bit. That's nice. 1990, 314,000 people died in tetanus. Or in 2019, there were only 35,000 deaths. Oh, so the number has gone down significantly. That's fantastic. I'm very happy to hear that. So the Europa.eu fact sheet says it causes around 250,000 deaths a year. This fact sheet says less. I don't know what's true for sure. The fact that the number has gone down, though, is wonderful. Now, where do these cases occur? In the European region, 303 new cases per year. In the region of the Americas, 786 new cases per year. And then it starts going up from there. Western Pacific, Eastern Mediterranean, African, and Southeast Asian regions. Just remember, guys, vaccines are probably the greatest medical achievement ever made, next to, like, germ theory. The number of lives they've saved are so large that it's basically uncountable. It is unimaginable. Like, if we did not have vaccines at all in the world, you would need to have like if World War II just happened indefinitely with its death count day in and day out, I still don't think it would match the number of people who died from diseases that vaccines could have prevented. It's like insane. When a person is anti-vaccine, they are pro-mass death. The genocide they want to, I guess genocide isn't the right term, the mass death they want to bring about is greater than that which, like, any Nazi regime could ever do. It's greater than any Mao famine mismanagement. It's impossible to calculate. Also, it would get rid of all the autistic people.
Story, because this illustrates very well your question. The DTP vaccine was discontinued in this country, and it was discontinued in Europe because so many kids were being injured by it. However, the WHO and Bill Gates gives it to 161 million African children every year. And,
thereby saving their lives. Yes.
And Bill Gates went to the Danish government and asked them to support this program, saying, we've saved 30 million kids from dying from diphtheria, tetanus, and pertussis. The Danish government said, can you show us the data? And he couldn't. So the Danish government paid for a big study with Novo Nordisk, which is a Scandinavian vaccine company, in West Africa. And they went to West Africa and they looked at the DTP vaccine for 30 years of data. And they retained the best vaccine scientists in the world, these kind of deities of African vaccine program, Peter AAB, Sigrid Morgensen, and a bunch of others. And they looked at 30 years of data for the DTP vaccine, and they came back and they were shocked by what they found. They found that the vaccine was preventing kids from getting diphtheria, tetanus, and pertussis. But the girls who got that vaccine were 10 times more likely to die over the next 6 months than children who didn't. Why is that? And they weren't dying from anything anybody ever associated with the vaccine. They were dying of anemia, bilharzia, malaria, sepsis, and mainly pulmonary and respiratory disease, pneumonia. And it turns out this is what
That's interesting. As far as I can tell, he's not lying. Evidence an increase in mortality after introduction of diphtheria, tetanus, pertussis vaccine to children aged 6 to 35 months in Guinea-Bissau. If there is a debunk of this, it's not something that I can debunk just by Googling it. I would be interested in seeing if there was something specific to these vaccines that was causing it. Obviously, over here in the United States or in the West broadly, the people who are taking these vaccines are not dying at massively elevated levels. This doctor goes over his claims and debunks it all. It's super informative.
Since the start of the COVID pandemic,
this is what a scientist looks like. Ooh, but could I find the section that refers to this? Perhaps by searching Guinea-Bissau? Let's find out. Oh, I think we found it.
Giving severe brain damage to 1 in 300 kids, and it was pulled in the United States. It was pulled in Europe, but Bill Gates still gives it to 161 million African children.
Don't copyright. Stop.
That's just a lie. Tdap and DTaP are different vaccines. They both give you immunity to diphtheria, pertussis, and tetanus, but they're slightly different formulations. One is meant for children under the age of 7, and the other is meant for people over the age of 7. Tdap is the one that is for people over the age of 7. It's never been pulled from the market in America. I got mine a few years ago before I had my first child. He's just lying here. There is absolutely no evidence to suggest that it was killing or giving brain damage to 1 in 300 children. Another complete lie. The safety profile of these vaccines is extensive. They have been tested in clinical trials. They have gone through a lot of safety testing in several different populations over many, many years. All of it comes to the exact same conclusion.
What about the bit with
these
the
vaccines
Africa?
are very safe. They work really well against the diseases that they are meant to protect.
Yeah, I know, Doug.
And there's just no real trial. Repeatedly, that he will try to make his show better about spreading misinformation and do better fact checking. And yet, he has the biggest anti-vaxxer in the world sitting in front of him, and he's making such a huge lie that Joe and Jamie just don't fact check. What are we doing here?
What they were trying to say is,
Does he not talk about this specific claim? I thought he did. It was pulled in Europe, but Bill Gates still gave it to 161 million African children every year, the same vaccine. Does he directly address that? He doesn't respond to that exact point. And given the fact there's a study to it, I think there's a very valid argument that in this case, Robert F. Kennedy is correct. I wonder what exactly led to that increase in mortality. That's very interesting. Of course, keep in mind that the fact that the Bill Gates Association provided these vaccines to children in Guinea-Bissau and it led to an increase in mortality doesn't change the fact that over here in the West, that is not happening. But I am interested in understanding why exactly this result was found. Can we do more research? Yeah, I'm not a virologist, unfortunately. This requires a higher degree of education and speciality than I have. Maybe we'll look into it in the future. Guinea-Bissau, Ken Munger.
that this is what the researchers found, who were all pro-vaccine, by the way. They said that this vaccine is killing more children than diphtheria, tetanus, and pertussis prior to the introduction of the vaccine. And for 30 years, nobody ever knows.
You're okay concluding off that one study? Don't be mad at me. If you want to go look at stuff, go look at stuff. I'm not concluding. I looked at the study. The study said what he says he's saying. It's go find a contrary study.
Noticed it. The vaccine was providing protection against those target illnesses, but it had ruined the children's immune systems, and they could not defend themselves against random infections that were harmless to most children.
But isn't it nearly impossible to prove that link?
You can't prove the link. All you can do is, for any particular interest, you can't.
All right, here we go. Commentary. Contrary findings from Guinea-Bissau and Papua New Guinea. 4 years ago, a study of routine immunizations in rural areas suggested that early BCG and measles vaccinations were associated with... Wait, is this the same vaccine? No, this is for tuberculosis and measles. This is different. Oh, there it is. Wait, but that early diphtheria... Sorry, I read too quickly. DTP vaccine was associated with an increased mortality. In response to the original paper on the nonspecific effects of vaccines Bissau, the WHO's Global Advisory Committee on Vaccine Safety sponsored 4 groups to reanalyze existing data sets to refute or replicate findings from Bissau. Okay, so they're double-checking their work here, basically. Oh, boy, we're straining the limits of my sociology brain right now. All right, all right. I'm speed reading. If I read all this out loud, we'd be here forever. Give me a sec. Oh, boy. Okay, conclusion. Okay, I think it's basically saying that the initial study was conducted in such a fashion that there were a number of biases that make it difficult to analyze the resulting data. Survivor bias being the larger of them, but a lot of it also being just poor tracking methods. Would that really explain such a significant distinction in the perceived mortality rate? This was published in 2005. Okay. Yes, a 10 times rate? Not impossible, but interesting. Published online 2018. When was this published, like originally? Does not say. Well, clearly before 2005. The conclusion from the original. Give me the damn... interesting. I'm going to file this aside to something that I want to look more into later, because we're really trying to learn about RFK here, more so than this one specific claim. He has probably made hundreds of spurious claims about vaccines. I'm interested in learning more about that one specifically, but in a bit.
Illness or death, you can't prove the link. But you can show statistically that that if you get that vaccine, you're more likely to die over the next 6 months than if you don't. And those,
thankfully, this is not the case for vaccines in the West, which is what we're primarily concerned with when we talk about, internal policy.
studies, unfortunately, are not done for any other vaccines. So for every other medicine, in order to get approval from the FDA, you have to do a placebo-controlled trial prior to licensure, where you look at health outcomes among an exposed group, a group that gets it, and compare those to a similarly situated group that gets a placebo. The only medical intervention that...
I can't listen to him talk anymore. Let's finish the website. America Strong again. As President, RFK Jr. will start the process of unwinding empire. We will bring the troops home. We will stop racking up unpayable debt to fight one war after another. The military will return to its proper role of defending our country. We will end the proxy wars, bombing campaigns, covert operations, coups, paramilitaries, and everything else that has become so normal most people don't know what's happening. What specifically? In Ukraine. Oh, okay, we're specifically addressing Ukraine. In Ukraine, the most important priority is to end the suffering of the Ukrainian people, victims of a brutal Russian invasion, and victims of American geopolitical machinations going back to at least 2014. That's true. That's definitely when America started directly intervening in Ukrainian politics. We must first get it clear. Is our mission to help the brave Ukrainians defend their sovereignty, or is it to use Ukraine as a pawn to weaken Russia? So, by defending Ukrainian sovereignty, Russia is weakened. They are both the same thing in this case. Robert F. Kennedy will choose the first. He will find a diplomatic solution that brings peace to Ukraine and brings our resources back where they belong. Well, you're gonna take the javelins back? You're gonna you want to like take it back? What are you talking about? We will offer to withdraw our troops and nuclear-capable missiles from Russia's borders. Wait, what? What troops you? What? What troops and nuclear-capable missiles are you referring to? What do you mean from the Baltics? The Baltics are in NATO. We have a military alliance with them. Russia will withdraw its troops from Ukraine and guarantee its freedom and independence. Oh, I bet they will. UN peacekeepers will guarantee peace to the Russian-speaking eastern regions. Like that language there, like UN peacekeepers would be necessary to protect the only people who have been attacking the Russian-speaking eastern regions are Russians. The implication here is that peacekeepers would be necessary to protect them from Ukrainian aggression. We will put an end to this war. We will put an end to the suffering of the Ukrainian people. This will be the start of a broader program of the demilitarization of all countries. Talks about JFK for a bit. Okay, nice. Let's see. RFK Jr. backed by group connected to top MAGA Republicans. That is not at all surprising. Oh, God. Please. Why? Why would you not just have them saying it? Why would you have this stupid music? Boomer site. It's Newsweek. Boomer site. Boomer behavior. RFK says Russia acted in good faith during Ukraine invasion.
Zelensky has repeated. Putin has repeatedly said yes. In fact, he negotiated 2 times. He agreed to agreements. He agreed to the Minsk Accords, and then he agreed.
He didn't create the Minsk Accord. It was made in a joint effort by a number of nations, and then neither side respected it. He didn't create it.
In 2022, to an agreement that would have left Ukraine completely intact.
No, it didn't. When? When has he ever said that he would agree to fully leave Ukraine? And if so, why didn't he just do that then? Or is this one of those agreements where it's like, we'll fully leave Ukraine, but also we reserve the right to invade you in the future, and you can't have a military, and you can't have nukes, and you can't join NATO, and you have to have a puppet government installed by us, and like all that crap, right?
And it was us who forced Zelensky to sabotage that agreement. It was
That is not even remotely true.
already signed.
It was already said. Wait, is he suggesting that like Putin and Zelensky were in a room together and they both signed like a peace deal and then America busted in and like tore it up? What is he suggesting? How do we do that? This is just made up. This is completely made up.
So, you know, the Russians were acting in good faith. So, no, I think we're the ones who have not been acting in good faith.
Yeah, as is the case with most of the far-right stuff that goes on in America, it's basically guaranteed that his like prominence and the attention cycle that he's been running is heavily promoted and backed by people operating from Russia. Russia has invested so much time and energy into destabilizing American politics by promoting far-right candidates and officials, their talking points and their messages, which is why you now have a bunch of like highly militaristic, xenophobic, lunatic fascists who are saying like, I think that America has engaged in neocolonialism by, you know, intervening in Ukraine in 2014. We're doing a proxy war. Like fascists normally talk like this. No, it's just it's a co-alignment of positions.
A just and lasting peace can open a pathway to sanctions relief connected to concrete actions, especially military withdrawal.
I don't give a shit about this guy. Robert F. Kennedy Jr. repeatedly suggested chemicals in water are impacting the sexuality of children. Oh, shit. It's not just frogs. They're turning the freaking frogs gay, except it's everyone. Man-made chemicals making children gay or transgender, causing the feminization of boys, masculinization of girls. Truly spectacular stuff. Please read this. It's so funny. A gigantic fart derailed RFK Jr.'s NYC press dinner. Now this is real news. Presidential hopeful RFK Jr. threw a press dinner on Tuesday night that devolved into a shouting match between two elderly men, a bizarre conflict that reportedly ended with a prolonged bout of flatulence. As relayed by a Page Six reporter who was present, the mess started after a guest asked Kennedy a question about the environment, an innocent enough inquiry that enraged former gossip columnist Doug Detchert, the reportedly drunk host of the whole event. The climate hoax, Detchert started to yell. His senile screams drew the ire of his longtime friend, art critic Anthony Hayden Guest, who wasted no time in condemning Detchert and pleading for him to shut up. But Detchert was relentless, continuing to rant about the scam of climate change, while Hayden Guest disparaged him with insults, calling him insane and insignificant. That's when Detchert brought out his secret weapon, a booming fart that he released while shouting, "I'm farting." All the while, RFK Jr. calmly watched the gaseous chaos. Why am I reading this? The gaseous chaos unfold. Detchert said the following to Page Six about the incident. I apologize for using my flatulence as a medium of public commentary in your presence. Is this a dude's rock moment? This feels like traditional aristocracy behavior. Who writes like this? How else would you write a story like this? Like, how else would you approach writing a story like this, I think? Oh yeah, I saw this as well. Since RFK Jr. basically exclusively appeals to Republicans, it like, and I seriously, I've not seen any like potential Biden voters talk about him at all. It makes a lot of sense that Republicans would just, I guess, commit to the bit. But as a Republican candidate, like RFK Jr. can't do or say anything because he's not even doing like the wedge issue stuff anymore. You know what I mean? He's not even like fulfilling his purpose as a divisive wedge candidate. I mean, Kennedys do have a history with Nazis. Yes, I suppose that's true. What's my man been tweeting about? Oh, we haven't talked about this, but he's muscular. He takes steroids.
Camus said, I believe in myth of Sisyphus. The only way to deal with an unfree world is to become so absolutely free that your very existence is an act of rebellion. What do you think he means by that?
Okay, this is lame as shit. Yeah, this is lame as shit. This is literally just like TikTok engagement bait. It's not even... Can't watch that. That's copyright. Pierce Morgan, uncensored. Democratic candidate RFK Jr. is confident he will beat Joe Biden in the primaries. Really?
But do you sense that he may not actually run in 2024 when it comes to it? And is that why you think you actually have a real chance of potentially becoming the Democrat nominee?
I think I have a chance of becoming the Democratic nominee because my numbers are better at beating Republicans than him.
Uh-huh. Jesus Christ. Complaining about Ukraine and NATO. Oh, Russell Brand. What a surprise.
The problem with all the clandestine operations, there's no accountability. And if the Espionage Division is part of that, they end up justifying all of these black ops rather than saying, okay, let's take a look at the long-term blowback, not just the short-term objective. Oh, for example, the CIA believes if they look at the overthrow of Saddam Hussein, they say that's a success story because they got rid of him. But then we spend $8 trillion. We kill more Iraqis than Saddam Hussein. We turn Iraq into a proxy for Iran. It's an incoherent nation.
We what? What was that last bit there? How did we turn Iraq into a proxy for Iran? What does that mean? They don't get along. What do you mean? Do you mean like they're our proxy against Iran? Or do you mean that they're Iran's proxy against us? I'm guessing that he means that they're our proxy against Iran. Guys, do you think that he thinks that Iraq got along well with Iran before the Iraq War? Like Saddam Hussein was friends with Iran? I don't even know what point he's making. Because Iraq is majority Shia and Iran supports Shia groups in Iran. So wait, is his argument that Iraq and Iran are getting along better? Because they're not a proxy. That's not what that means. I don't even understand. I don't even know. He probably means proxy war. There's no proxy. We're not doing a proxy war against Iran right now by any definition. There's no way to justify that belief.
Nation that's just a series of warring death squads between Shia and Sunni, and we create ISIS and we drive 2 million refugees into Europe and destabilize democracy and everything.
Wait, whoa. Hold on. Wait. Hold on. First of all, refugees moving to Europe did not destabilize their democracies. That's racist. Very progressive from RFK here. Like, oh yeah, and we destroyed Europe by sending their Syrians over there. Second of all, that was Assad. The Syrian civil war was Assad. Okay? I'm sorry. I'm not... Look, I love to blame the West for stuff, and we have a hand... We've got our hand in a lot of honeypots, okay? I do not think that the Syrian civil war is all on us. Assad's pretty bad. It was Assad in Russia. Well, Assad's a Russian puppet, so... Well, not puppet, really. It's complicated than that, but they're allies.
Country in Europe and probably have something to do with Brexit. And so if you look at all of the blowback and then say, was it a good idea to overthrow Saddam Hussein?
Well, he's obviously an Assadist. Yeah, but here's the weird thing. I'm pretty sure that RFK is pro-Israel. You can't really be pro-Israel, but also be an Assadist. So I think that it would be more accurate to say that he's a crank. Seriously, I really do think that he's like, a lot of it is just this, you know? Hey, Connor boy.
The answer would be no, it wasn't. If you like this video and you want to...
I don't, thank you. Russia are pro-Israel and pro-Assad? Well, Russia's stance on Israel is pretty complicated. I don't know if it's fully, like, pro-Israel. But it is true that Israel is no ally to democracies.
Treating the Russians baselessly as an enemy, it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. Do you see China in the same way as an enemy of the United States?
How do you have a nose with nostril passages that big and still sound that nasally when you talk? Having a big nose should mean that you don't sound nasally because your sinuses are clear. How does Glenn sound that nasally with a big honker like that?
States who needs to be treated as an enemy, or do you think we can also foster more collaborative or at least less antagonistic relationships with Beijing?
I do see them as an adversary of the United States. I think they're competitive with us, they're ambitious, and the indications are that the Chinese leadership does want to dominate the globe and have access to the natural resources in the developing world. But the Chinese do not want to compete with us militarily, and they shouldn't. We have 3 times the military budget that they do. We spend more on our military than the next top 10 nations combined. We have 800 bases all over the world. The Chinese have 1.5 bases outside of China, so they're not looking for a military competition, and we shouldn't be either.
Okay, I guess I technically don't disagree with what he said so far. Because Saddam was the biggest bulwark against Iran and Sunni forces gaining power in the region. When we took him out, we left a power vacuum Iran could utilize. Okay, but I don't I don't know if it's I don't know if we could be like, oh, thank God Saddam was maintaining like peace and stability in the region by like occasionally doing a genocide in a war, but also he kept like, you know, the Sunnis in line or whatever. I don't know. I don't think Saddam was good for regional stability. Doesn't it make sense that Iran would have a ton of like geopolitical pull over Iraq anyway? They're a much larger and stronger country. Like, in a good world, Iran and Iraq should be allies and like good neighbors to each other. That's like a normal thing. Like, that's like a normal thing that should reasonably happen. Yeah, but overthrowing him was objectively bad for regional stability. Yeah, well, certainly with like ISIS and stuff like that. I mean, internally, Iraq is calmer than it was during some points of his leadership. But like, I don't know if I like the idea of framing Iraq and Iran getting along better as like a downside, or Iraq being a proxy for Iran. You know what I mean? Like, yeah.
I'm not scared of America competing with China on an economic plane. And I think we should welcome that competition. It would be good for the Chinese, good for the Americans, and good for the rest of the world. And we should de-escalate the military confrontations, take the pressure off of China and Taiwan, let them figure it out for themselves.
No. What do you mean take the pressure off of and let them figure it out? Here, China, the country that keeps threatening to invade Taiwan, and Taiwan, tiny island nation. I know we pledge to defend you if you're invaded, but like, you know, good luck. They want them microchips.
Close most of those bases, bring the money home, get the peace dividend, rebuild our industrial base, and have an economic competition against the Chinese that's friendly, that's congenial, but that's vigorous and robust. I'm not scared that America cannot outcompete China head-to-head on economic issues. If you like this video and you want to help me...
We don't need to compete with them. What the hell was that basketball clip? Oh, okay, I don't know. It's a wide lens. It's basically capitalist brain poison talking. Well, remember, his economic lens is libertarian, right? Like, his guiding philosophy here, when it comes to a lot of these issues, is like rein in government, let corporations reign, but like be progressive broadly. But like not really, because he thinks the chemicals in the water are making people trans. The progressivism is largely disingenuous and takes second fiddle to the conspiracy bait. And it's pretty difficult to be a hardcore conspiracist and a progressive at the same time. But, you know, who knows, right? Who the fuck knows? So he's nothing like JFK? No, there's no, yeah. It's not, their positions aren't genetically determined. Do you think he had a ghostwriter for his website? Yeah, of course. No presidential candidate would write their own website. God, look how big he is. Isn't Ice Cube like super anti-Semitic and stuff? Isn't he? I think I remember that. That sounds about right.
Do you think there's a kind of horseshoe happening within politics?
Well, I would say this, that I consider myself a traditional Kennedy liberal. I don't know any of the values that my uncle, John Kennedy, harbored, or my father shared that I don't share. They had antipathy and...
They were also anti-vax.
Suspicion of war and the military-industrial complex.
Whoa, hold on. JFK was not some kind of like anti-war dove, all right? He contributed significantly to worsening relations with the Soviet Union. The Bay of Pigs, the Cuban Missile Crisis? No. Hold on.
They did not want corporations running the American government.
What's the Bay of Pigs? A bunch of Cubans who fled to America after Castro led a successful revolution in Cuba. The CIA rounded them up and they were like, hey guys, go on a big boat over to Cuba and like defeat Castro and take your country back. We'll support you. It'll be great. Haha. And then we didn't support them and we basically just sent like a ton of people over there to get gunned down on the beaches. It's like a big troll. You know what I mean? We will totally give you air support. Yeah. Wasn't the Bay of Pigs because the CIA tried to pull a fast one on JFK? Nah, JFK wasn't super committed to the project, but he did sign off on it. Basically, it was the previous administration initially created the idea, and JFK kind of inherited it, and he was like, well, all right, nothing bad ever happens to the Kennedys, all right, but he still like signed off on it. He wasn't like deceived or whatever. He should have known it was a bad idea.
They were completely against censorship. They were...
What? I don't know JFK's positions on censorship, but he was a president during the Cold War. I guarantee you he was like responsible for some deep state spook stuff. No way.
Against the use of fear as a governing tool.
What? Okay, if you want to, you can just read up like the ways in which JFK handled the Cuban Missile Crisis and the Cold War broadly. Just don't, whatever.
They spoke out about it often. And you go down the list of the things that they believe in, and I don't think that there's really any daylight between me and what they believed. But I do think that there is a growing coalition of the left and right in our country
Remember? This is the line, right? It's that populist centrism stuff where it's like people are tired of the elites, and it's time for people to rise up and start caring about the real issues, like how vaccines are making our kids trans, like but the funny thing is he's like pretty libertarian, which means he's not in favor of corporate regulation, which means that his official policies are pretty much objectively pro like oligarchy, If you don't care for meaningfully curtailing the corporate state, then you can't, like, you're not populist. It's like fake populism again. But that's the point. He's a wedge candidate. The whole point is to like stir shit up with the Democrats to try to pull people over. Yeah, he's the official Breaking Points candidate. He's the official Jimmy Dore candidate.
Populist forces on the left and right that are convening now and that are, finding common ground. And I think that really is probably the only thing that is going to rescue American democracy. There's a rebellion happening in our country now. There's a populist rebellion. And if we don't capture that rebellion, making our country an exemplary nation again, somebody else is going to hijack that rebellion for much darker purposes. And I don't think it's a good idea to say we're not going to talk to American populists because they're deplorable. They're Americans. They're our brothers and sisters.
See, now he's going to pretend that it's the left wing that has arrogantly refused to engage with the right. Whereas right now the right is literally holding like death marches and crowing about how when they take power, they're going to destroy all their enemies. Like, yeah, it's definitely the left that has utterly refused to engage with the opposition, and not that the right is so insanely militant that they think they'll catch like the gay trans disease by talking to people on the left. Keep in mind that, again, this guy has no chance in the primaries. Because the primaries are basically not happening, it's pretty much only Biden and Kennedy that are viable candidates for the primary. Like, there are some other edge case candidates, but nobody cares. And Kennedy is getting like between 8 and 17% more or less, with Biden getting the lion's share of the percentage for primary preference. But what's important to understand is that Kennedy is benefiting from a massively powerful force that will skew the results here in his favor. His name. Most of the Democrats responding to these polls just see Kennedy flash back to, the most powerful and influential Democratic political dynasty in the country's history, and they think, that'd be great, It's Nepo baby shit, right? They don't know what he sounds like. They don't know what his policies are. That's what you get from these early, like, primary polls. They're not reflective of people's actual interest. If they actually were up there on a stage together, God, can you imagine him trying to talk on a stage, like into a mic, in a debate? Ooh. Versus somebody who's actually opposing him and not somebody who's just going to, like, smile and nod as he rambles off vaccine conspiracy bullshit. Yeah, no. So he's purely here to do wedge stuff. Tucker Carlson on why he admires RFK and the greatest thing that RFK Jr said to him. RFK retweeting endorsements from Tucker Carlson. It's fantastic. Complaining about cluster bombs from the Biden administration. Everyone ready for another regime change war? That's what Biden seems to be signaling when he agreed last week that Assad must go. What? Saying this dictator has to go is the same thing as backing a regime change war? What if we wanted to do that, why wouldn't we have done it any time over the past, 8 years since the Syrian civil war started? We've had troops stationed, in Syria with our Rajavan allies. Why? Okay, okay. Who must go? Well, Assad has never gone, so. Man, he has really been running the circuit. Here's Kim Iverson, a fascist, possibly Nazi? This was the person who said that the fact that when a white man murders his family, they show a pleasant picture of him, as opposed to when black people murder their family, they show a thug picture of him. She said this was anti-white racism because it makes you paranoid of all white people. Yeah, she's a lunatic.
The Party certainly has gone all in on that. If you were to get into the Oval Office...
Oh, it's cool how he's doing all of these media runs on all of these famously like Biden supporting platforms, right? It's just interesting how his reach across the aisle populism seems to exclusively involve talking to far right or center figures with a strong conspiratorial bent. I think the closest thing he's done to talk to a left-leaning figure was Bill Maher, and it was just so they could both agree on like vaccine denial.
Office, how could you unravel this type of industry capture?
I would say I have like a PhD in how to unravel agency capture because I've been suing these agencies for so many years. I've been involved in litigation, many cases with EPA, which is captured by oil, by coal, HHS, and the pharmaceutical.
Oh, interesting. So you think that the EPA is captured by oil and coal? I agree. So what are you going to do about that to shift American energy investment away from oil and coal? Because like that right, because that's like a big issue. Like that's a huge thing. Even Biden won't do that.
Pharmaceutical industry, which owns NIH, CDC, and FDA. I've litigated against the Department of Agriculture because it's captured by Smithfield and Tyson and Monsanto. And all of these agencies, those umbilical cords to industry have to be broken. They're basically functioning as wholly owned subsidiaries for the industries they're supposed to regulate.
Everything this guy says is like mathematically calculated to appeal to shoe on head. But like, again, all of these sound great until you reflect for a second and think like, okay, so he thinks corporations are overly involved in government. I completely agree. So what does he want to do with that? But this populist messaging is incompatible with a free market approach towards addressing this corruption, meaning that it's like he'll point at it, but he can't do anything about it.
Most politicians get in there hoping to drain the swamp. I'm not intimidated by the agencies. I know how they work and I know how to change them. And most of those changes you do not need Congress for.
See, that's very telling right there. I'm not intimidated by the agencies. My friend, the EPA is not the thing that you'd be intimidated by. The oil and coal lobbies are what you would be intimidated by. The EPA's power is infinitesimally small compared to the corporations that have captured them. So what are you going to do about that? Worth noting, the only industry he seems willing to actually go after is the pharmaceutical one. And even then, it's not with like economic reform proposal. It's more like, oh no, you can't produce vaccines anymore. Like the one time he actually specifically talks about dealing with a corporation or like an industry, market regulation. The one time he talks about that, the only time he talks about that seems to be in the context of we can't let them produce life-saving vaccines. But he's very vague about it.
With a stroke of the pen, you can change back the rule that allows pharmaceutical advertisers to do direct-to-consumer ads on television. Another thing that
I agree. So I think that'd be great. I think that'd be great. I agree with that. Unironically, there's no reason to directly market medications to consumers. That's not necessary. That is not needed. It's not good.
I can do is I can open up all the databases. CDC keeps it in a lockbox like Fort Knox and make sure no scientist is allowed in there. So I'll open up that database on day one. I have 100
what database? I don't know what he's referring to here.
Things that I'm going to do immediately to unravel the agency capture in these agencies. I will end that overnight.
I believe him. I don't know what he's referring to with the lockbox info. Transparency in science is great, certainly. I don't know what he's referring to with like secret CDC databases, though. Oh, here's him suddenly pretending to have a problem with capitalism when it means being anti-Ukraine. JP Morgan, BlackRock, and the neoliberal establishment are salivating over a profit bonanza in post-war Ukraine. Yes, it is true. We live under capitalism, so if an area suddenly becomes available for investment, they will want to invest. That's an inevitable force in the system. That's how that works. I'm a Eurotard. Does this guy stand a chance of winning? No. I kind of like watching these clips, though. Ironically, RFK supports neoliberal policies, though. Yeah, of course. Yeah, he's not in favor of corporate regulation. Like I said, it's all disingenuous populism. RFK spoke on the Jan Nationalist Tour. He spoke at this? Oh, yeah. This looks like, yeah. This looks like a very middle of the road populist reaching across the aisle kind of event right here. Uh-huh. Wow. The podcast advertising this is on rumble.com. What a shock. This is the people who are obsessed with that World Economic Forum narrative of the Great Reset, which didn't happen, by the way. The Great Reset was literally just them saying, hey, now that everyone's staying indoors and shipping is cut down significantly, maybe we can like do some economic restructuring. And because it's the World Economic Forum, the economic restructuring they were referring to would have made them more money. And then the COVID lockdowns are done. Everything's more or less back to normal. The Great Reset didn't happen. It didn't happen. It was just literally like one guy suggested it at a World Economic Forum meeting. And then like it didn't happen and it's over now. But Nazis, like most of the people here, I assume, treat it like this is the new world order, like Jewish deep state, like control. Look at the messaging here. It's a snake and it's versus the Holy Bible. You know, the Great Reawakening here is like the storm. It's the QAnon storm. Like the Christian nationalists surge out and reawaken and take control after being buffeted by the tyranny of the Jewish cabal that control the world and want to destroy the white man or whatever. What a shock. Bill Gates and Soros are here. Wow. Amazing. And Obama. Mike Pillow Dude isn't one of the red ones. Yeah, he's had to declare bankruptcy recently, or at least he's preparing to. He's selling off a ton of assets. It's pretty funny. Like, are they supposed to be centrists? Well, the most of these people, I'm pretty sure, are like pretty open Christian nationalist fascists. RFK pretends to do this like, I'm reaching across the aisle to unite both people in a time of great divisiveness, when in reality he almost exclusively talks to the far right, or at the very least like conspiracy-addled people. You missed the 50% off for pastors. Oh yeah, 50% off for all pastors right here down the bottom left. And yeah, this is being led by General Flynn. General Flynn was one of the like active QAnon guys. Was he the one who did the thing where he like pledged to QAnon in that like fire pit with his family? Was he the guy who did that? Yeah, he like had a fire pit in his backyard and he and his family took a pledge to QAnon, like a psychopath. Yeah.
Presidency at this point.
Well, I saw the country going in a direction and my political party going in a direction.
Okay, I think we get the gist with this guy, don't we? I feel like we've actually done a pretty deep and convincing expose on this guy. I feel like we get his vibe now. So I don't know if he's a grifter. I know that he's a crank. His policies are internally inconsistent. He mostly cares about the conspiracy stuff. The populism is incoherent and disingenuous. He's definitely having his talking points at the very least motivated by like Russia or Russia-adjacent people. And he exists only to be a wedge to try to move people from the left to the right. But I don't know how effectively he's doing that because, again, I don't see any Democrats engage with him. Literally, the only people he engages with are far-right people. So yeah, I don't know. I would be surprised, honestly, if he I would be surprised if he even made it to the primaries, like if he even got like the floor necessary for it, you know? He's the 2023 version of Tulsi Gabbard. I think that's a great way of putting it. Yeah, no, pretty much, yeah. The difference is that Tulsi Gabbard only did her massive shift rightward after the primaries, whereas he's done it before the primaries, which seems kind of backwards. But yeah, I mean that's a strategy. You know?